Everybody. It's 10:05, so we're going to get going. And we've got a couple people on Zoom today, including Senator Hatchett, and then Senator Parent will be back in a minute. I'm going to ask Senator Payne to open us up in prayer.
You would join me? Let's bow our heads. Dear Heavenly Father, we just thank you, Lord, for all your many blessings. We thank you first and foremost for the breath of life that filled our lungs this morning, which comes with only your plan of your plan and of your purpose. Lord, we just ask you to lead us in your purpose and lead us to do your will in all things that we do before us. For us in Jesus' name we pray. Amen.
Thank you. Okay, so just a couple of preliminary things. One is we are going to be finished no later than 12, as usual. And my committee will be meeting again on Friday at 1:00 to approve the report that we're going to generate with our recommendations from all the testimony that we've heard so far. And those of you who have been around here for a while know that we can't fix everything in 1 year. And there are some things that need legislation and a lot of things that don't necessarily need legislation. They just need the right people in the rooms. And so you can stay tuned for that, because this study committee will be abolished along with all the other study committees on December 1st. So we have to get our report out, and it will be on the website once it's approved, certainly by early December. The other thing is I'm using a little bit of chairman prerogative here to let you know that this committee, although it's about the transition age youth, we also are very interested in how to keep people from getting into this system to begin with, particularly as it relates to ending up in all the challenges that go with the aging out process. So you're going to hear some testimony today that you may wonder, well, how's this related to aging out of foster care? But that's a piece of the puzzle that we're going to address. So with that, we've got some experts that are going to testify today. And I'm going to first ask Dr. Michelle Zena to come up and have a seat at the table. And committee members have these presentations in their packets, and you guys can follow along on the screens. I've asked all the speakers to try to keep their remarks down to about 10 minutes so that we can finish on time and leave enough time for questions.
You gonna get the speaker's version? Okay.
Okay, Dr. Zena, you want to introduce yourself and proceed, and speak loudly because we do have people live streaming this in addition to the people that are in the room.
Thank you. I'm Dr. Michelle Zena. I'm a pediatrician by training, and I have a medical practice that focuses on behavioral pediatrics, autism, complex ADHD, anxiety, Tourette's, and related disorders. And we see children from all over South Georgia, about 80 counties. Today, my focus is on exiting foster care with autism spectrum disorder. First, a quick review of autism, because I realize all the time that there are folks who need a little refresher there. And then we're going to talk some about the DFACS Autism Pilot and our research. First off, everyone with autism has a few core features. They have impaired back and forth interactions. That could be two-way conversation. It could be regulating your emotions so that your reaction is appropriate to the situation. They all have ineffective social communication. Social communication is really body language, the how we say it, not the facts. And that's what we project, but it's also being able to understand other people's body language, other people's tone of voice, personal space, eye contact, being able to pick up on if somebody is teasing or they're being mean. And everyone with autism also has impaired relationships, and that could be developing new relationships. It could be maintaining existing relationships, or in the case where it's really relevant for children aging out of foster care, understanding social hierarchy, understanding who's in charge, When you're 6, it's that you're not the boss of the house. And I hear that a lot from parents, that they think their 6-year-old on the autism spectrum and thinks that they're the boss. But in a workplace environment, it's very important to understand social hierarchy. Then everyone with autism also has some combination of restricted interest. That could be any kind of hobby. It can also be interesting things like license plates or kids who are obsessed with a string. But as adults, if your interest aligns with your job, then you tend to be very successful and work a whole lot. And you don't really think of it as work at all. Repetitive behaviors could be, rocking back and forth, or repetitive speech, or repetitive questioning. It also includes inflexible or rigid thinking. In young children, that means that they avoid something that's new. That can also be the case for adults. Or young adults, being very routine-driven, very unwavering and decisive. And then there are sensory issues that a lot of people with autism have. They're overly aware or under-aware of their senses. Now, when we think about the impact of all of this, if you're 17, 18, 19, 20 years old and you're choosing your career, if you are a very rigid thinker who's very interested in numbers, who is very black and white, very rules oriented, then you're going to do very well in a bookkeeping, accounting, forensic accounting type job if your other abilities match up with that. If you are going into nursing, you're unlikely to be a labor and delivery nurse where everything is all lovey-dovey and all about social communication and developing relationships with people, but you're likely to be very good at being an ICU night shift nurse. And if you understand that you have autism and what your strengths and weaknesses are, then life is just easier. The person who's obsessed with flow and pours out all the shampoo and all the lotion and the laundry detergent as a 4-year-old because they want to watch how it moves can become an excellent plumber one day. So just some perspective to help make things a little easier for everyone. Now my slides aren't advancing when I click the arrow. Diagnosis and okay. Yeah. Diagnosis and treatment really improve quality of life. They improve relationships. They improve communication. They improve access to services. Often you don't get access to autism-related services if you don't have a diagnosis. They improve educational outcomes because a diagnosis improves your likelihood of being able to access appropriate special education services, and they improve employability. The DFACS Autism Pilot was designed and commissioned by DFACS Commissioner Brose and funded by the state legislature to, thank you, to determine the prevalence of autism among foster youth. And that no previous study had been done specific to children and youth in foster care. Almost 3% of Georgia's children have autism. Over 17% of Georgia's foster youth had autism in our initial study. And we did find that the diagnosis and treatment improved placement stability dramatically. So after children got appropriate diagnosis, even before they got appropriate treatment, things got better. And then as they got treatment too, the likelihood that they exited the foster system also increased, back with biological parents, with guardians as permanent guardians, adopted. So when we look at our data, our study was 609 children, and it was any 2 to 17-year-old from Region 12 within a 90-day window that was in foster care for at least 2 days. The motivation for a child to be included or excluded from the study had nothing to do with whether or not they were in that study population. It might have contributed to some of the ones who had no data obtained, which was almost 22%. But of that study population, 2.3% of them were already diagnosed with autism. And of those, about half, DFACS was unaware of the diagnosis because it was in records that we obtained that came from the school system, medical records requests, Department of Juvenile Justice. 26.8% screened negative, but 51% screened positive. And a screening just means that you need further evaluation. But when we look at the further evaluation for those, so half of the kids needed further evaluation and 2% already had autism. We ended up diagnosing 17.4% with autism. 41.5% of those did not have autism. And then we got no data on a quarter and incomplete data, and we weren't able to determine the long-term outcome for the remaining 17%. This really says we need to know much more about what strategies we can use to determine the prevalence of autism, identify those kids, and then connect them to appropriate services. We know that being connected to appropriate services for autism means the total cost expended by the state over your life is much less if you get early intervention. I mean, cost savings per person is well over $1 million, which says a lot.
Say that again.
Cost savings per person for early intervention is well over $1 million saved
Per
per person, per child identified and receiving early intervention. Yeah.
Did y'all catch that?
Not a little money. So when we think about what's next, we need to prepare to screen all foster youth, all children and youth in foster care for autism spectrum disorder so that we can identify those who meet diagnostic criteria and connect them to appropriate services. And we are working hard on evaluating feasibility to figure out what the right approaches to make that happen are.
Senator Payne.
Thank you, Madam Chairman. This is very interesting to me because I started with the Department of Children and Youth Services long before we were Department of Juvenile Justice, DJJ, and worked there did that for 30 years. And so do you think my question is, I know it's like so many things that now, and I'm jumping up and down because a lot of people see behavioral health as a need now. They didn't in the 90s.
Yes.
And I said, but at the same time, I think we have a lot of growing pains that we're going through because we realize we got more need than anybody ever thought before. Do you think that we're headed in the right direction as far as, the things that we've done as far as needs-based evaluations of kids today?
Well, needs-based evaluations are certainly important. And I think the biggest challenge is the person who's doing the evaluation needs to understand everything that this child could need. Because if you're just looking at things from an educational perspective, then you're going to miss something. If you're just looking, if a counselor is doing a trauma assessment, well, that counselor is not qualified to even screen for autism. And we saw repeatedly children who had a a RAD diagnosis, reactive attachment disorder, that had been misdiagnosed. They actually had autism, and so they weren't getting any of the appropriate services that they needed. We're headed in the right direction, but we got a long way to go.
Okay. Thank you.
Any other questions? Parent.
Thank you, Madam Chair. Thank you for your presentation. So you said the number of children that were in the study, but can you repeat it? It was
609 were in the original study population.
Okay. Original study population. And this was just done fairly recently, right?
Yes, we provided our data at the very end of 2024.
Okay.
And we're continuing to analyze that data.
And this is more out of my own curiosity. Region 12 is, I should know this.
Region 12 is Bullock and Effingham counties,
Okay.
and then over to Chatham and down the coast, like the number 7.
Thank you.
That region was ideal because it includes extremely urban, a military base, suburban, and extremely rural. So it's pretty representative for Georgia.
Thank you.
Dr. Zini, we really appreciate your driving all the way up here from South Georgia and taking time out of your busy practice to speak to us today. And stay tuned.
Excellent.
And that is a long drive when you just turn around and go back.
Okay, next, also speaking to us about autism, Dr. Nathan Call, who you can introduce yourself, but I've worked with him quite a bit in his role at the Marcus Autism Center. Thanks for being here.
Pleasure.
And if you could introduce yourself and
Sure, well,
kind of
get
what
this
you
finished.
do.
I'm Nate Call. I am a psychologist and director of the Marcus Autism Center here in Atlanta, Georgia. I'm also a professor in the Department of Pediatrics at Emory University School of Medicine. And I'm really grateful for the opportunity to be here today. Dr. Zina did a nice job of describing autism and the prevalence and how much this is an issue within foster care. I'm going to speak a little bit about a subset of that population, but also the subset of the population of children on the autism spectrum who find themselves in foster care or engage with the foster care system, who have some of the most significant sets of needs and therefore can require significant resources, and some of the work that needs to happen in order to prevent those kids from getting into the foster care system in the first place, to the point that Madam Chair raised earlier. So specifically, I'm going to talk a little bit about, let's see, I'm having the same issue moving forward. All right, well, while they're helping with this, then I will just say that, oh, here we go. The specific issue I'm going to speak a little bit about is this issue of challenging behavior. The term varies from place to place, but this is behavior that is putting a child or a family at some risk of harm, or in some cases that harm can be things like placement, loss of their residence, and can be quite significant for some kids on the autism spectrum. This includes things like aggression, self-injury, tantrums, property destruction. In the slide, you'll see on the right, it's a little bit hard to see. This is a child who engages in a behavior that's not uncommon in individuals on the autism spectrum called pica. It's ingestion of inedible objects. Got a really cool X-ray collection if you want to see things that kids have had swallowed that they have to have surgically removed because they're life-threatening. Elopement is another. These are kids who wander away, run away from care. This is the leading contributor to the fact that kids on the autism spectrum have doubled the premature death rate of their neurotypical peers. It's because they run from home or they wander away from home, they fall into bodies of water and drown, they're struck by vehicles. So this is a life-threatening set of conditions and can be enormously stressful for families. So within our center at Marcus Autism Center, we conducted formal focus groups with sets of families of kids with children on the autism spectrum, and wanted to understand the impact this kind of behavior has on them. You can see in the figure on the right just some of the themes that emerged as we spoke with them, and we did a formal analysis to understand, first of all, just the physical impact this behavior has on injuries to the child, injuries to the family members, the need to rearrange their home or their household, the impact on quality of life. We hear a lot of stories about kids and families saying, you know, we don't go on vacations, we don't leave our home unless really under dire circumstances. There's a quote from a parent that took part in this focus group, but I think that the story that I've told a few times that was quite shocking for me, and so if you'll indulge me in an anecdote, I started talking to a family who came to our center looking for help. And she had a son who was about 12 years old, and I asked, how are you doing? And she said, you know, things aren't great, but we're getting by. I said, well, tell me what getting by looks like for you. And she said, our son, when he gets upset, we take our other 2 little girls into the back bedroom. We barricade ourselves inside with some heavy furniture. And it's usually 45 minutes to an hour before he calms down. And then we can come out and look around and see what the holes in the wall look like, because we got to know if we're over our drywall budget this month. And the windows are all screwed shut and there's plexiglass over those. And we keep the appliances in the garage. We cook our meals in the garage because he destroyed our washer dryer. We actually use the laundry room as a playroom because we can keep our girls locked in there with their toys where they'll be safe. We don't have a lot of other furniture in the house. We eat our meals off of paper plates. We have 2 deadbolts on the door. I keep one key around my neck. My husband keeps the other key around his neck. Because if he knocks one of us unconscious, he's going to get the key. And we know that he'll get out of the house because the last time that happened, it was 24 hours before the cops found him in the woods with no clothes on. But, you know, we're getting by. right? And this was this family's every day. And I think we can't underestimate the impact that this kind of situation, these are not families that you see all the time. These are not families that you see at church. These are not families that you see at Publix, but they're there. They just don't go to those places because they're very isolated. They oftentimes don't have a system of support, but they absolutely are out there. And we see these families at our center and try to provide the kinds of support that they need. But it's not shocking when families like this turn to foster care as a place for those kids to go, because they really are at their wits' end. They love their children. They love their entire family. They're making impossible choices about keeping themselves and the child's siblings safe, or this child, and they have to make some really difficult decisions. And so supporting these families in the ways that they need really is not only important from the standpoint of providing what's right for that kid, but from a state standpoint, these are the kids that once they're in the foster care system is not always particularly well set up to manage these kids. They are extremely expensive. It is an extremely challenging situation. And so we've all heard stories, I think, about kids like this who end up in foster care and the impact that it has on the entire community and on the system. The other thing I should say is we actually did some assessments with families who came for our service for challenging behavior. 45% of them met criteria for PTSD, and it wasn't even close. Some of these people had PTSD ratio levels that you would expect in soldiers who have been deployed into combat zones, because they are suffering from injuries. They're suffering from the kind of wear and tear on their household and their family and the strain. It's not surprising that families of kids on the autism spectrum have way higher divorce rates. This can be an extremely stressful thing, and it leads to some of these issues that we're talking about here today. When it comes to what do you do for these families, a lot of people talk about psychopharmacology. That's a frontline intervention approach. Medication is easier. If you can give a pill for something, that's a lot easier than making wholesale change to a household or a situation like that. There aren't medications that solve these issues. I have a good number of psychiatrists who work at our center, and if you talk to them in a moment of candor and honesty, what they'll tell you is, yeah, we sometimes have some things that can kind of take the edge off, but very rarely will you see a medication that produces a night and day change for kids like this. Crisis stabilization is something that is critically important within the ecosystem of care that these kids and these families require. The truth is, though, most of these crisis stabilization systems are really important for providing a break to families and kids. It's a good opportunity for everybody to kind of have a cooling off. But it doesn't change the underlying system that's leading to the child being there in the first place. It doesn't address the underlying root cause. And so while it's an important piece of the puzzle, it is not the entire solution by any stretch. Respite services is another great example. We talk to a lot of families who are on the NOW or the COMP waiver and theoretically have access to respite services, but they can't find a respite provider who will work with their kid, because their child has aggression or is self-injurious or is challenging or is scary in ways that they can't find a person who will work at the rate of a respite provider and has the training and the expertise to stay safe or will accept those cases. And so what you see is the families who need the respite the most have the least access to those respite services. Applied behavior analysis is something that's talked about a lot, and certainly from an overall standpoint as a set of interventions to move the needle on early intervention and really produce the kinds of outcomes that can have the long-term optimization for kids and families that can have the types of financial impact that was just described by Dr. Zena. This is absolutely the right approach. There are a lot of people who have the background training who are in applied behavior analysis. This is my background and my training as well, but your average behavior analyst who's working in the community at an ABA center might not have a ton of experience working with the more complex or particularly challenging behavior. We've done some work, again, in a nationwide survey that we conducted amongst BCBAs. We found that 72% of them work at centers who won't see kids with autism with significant forms of challenging behavior, that the challenging behavior is preventative to them accessing ABA services. And those who did see kids like this, over half of them said that their wait was over a year long for kids to be able to access those services. So there is work that can be done. There's a lot to be done. I think the overall system needs a lot of support within our center. Part of what we're trying to do is to do more capacity building, to work with those providers like BCBAs, to give them more experience. At our center, we have really good outcomes for kids like this, but we have a significant wait. It's hard for families to get seen. And so we want to be able to do more to say, look, if you have to come to the Marcus Autism Center to get the right services, that is a limitation. So how do we scale up in ways that can expand community access? So we've developed some interventions that can be manualized. You can hand it off to a mediocre therapist in your community. Nobody that anyone here knows, of course, but we all know that those people exist somewhere. And if they can produce the same kinds of outcomes that are produced now at the Marcus Autism Center through the type of training that we can provide, then that's a win if it means that a kid is kept safe. We're starting with elopement, again, because that is the leading issue in terms of child safety. Kids on the spectrum are passing away at alarming rates because of their elopement behavior. And so we have a manualized intervention. It's been studied. It's been through NIH randomized clinical trials. We're in the midst of doing this now with the Georgia Mental Health Access and Pediatrics program to pilot that and training providers in the state of Georgia. So I'll leave it there. I know I moved fast, but I wanted to get through the material. I know you guys all have a very, very busy day, and I'll definitely questions.
Can you say again what GMAP?
Yeah,
stands
so
for?
this is a HRSA funded project that's through the that's overseen by Georgia State. And so this is part of their Behavioral Health Center of Excellence team. And they administer those HRSA funds. And we have just agreed on a project to start doing training in elopement for providers throughout the state of Georgia.
But the acronym,
Georgia Mental Health Access and Pediatrics.
okay.
Sorry.
One other question. You know, I've had a number of conversations over the years, and one of the things that I think would be helpful for the committee to understand is the different ways that ABA therapy is done and what the differences are.
Yeah, it's a great question. So applied behavior analysis is oftentimes kind of seen as one thing. The reality is it's just an approach to intervention that is based on learning primarily and effective means of learning. So it's really appropriate for kids when it comes to establishing new skills, especially in autism. So kids who lack skills like social engagement, lack skills like language and communication. And so your average ABA-based intervention, if you go out in the community, is really going to be focused on skill acquisition, especially for younger kids on the autism spectrum where there are those big deficits and where early intervention can make the biggest gains. But there are other things that still operate within the same theoretical framework, including things like addressing challenging behavior like aggression, self-injury. Toilet training is another one that we really have seen really good outcomes for kids who can't go to summer camp or can't be in a regular education classroom because of issues like toilet training. And it's not the most complicated thing in the world, but it makes a big difference for families. Feeding is another one. We have a whole center at our program in our center that is focused on kids who can't maintain their nutritional needs through eating. Kids on the autism spectrum who get super selective. Dr. Zena was talking about sensory sensitivities. And so kids on the spectrum might become sensitive to taste or textures. We saw a kid not that long ago who would only eat the insides of McDonald's French fries from the McDonald's near his house. And if they're closed on Christmas, he doesn't eat that day. And so we've seen a resurgence of conditions like scurvy in the emergency rooms and in pediatric systems because kids aren't getting vitamin C. It's an easy thing to address, but if all you eat is one thing, you're having scurvy, rickets, stuff like that. Excuse me. And so these are all behavior analytic approaches. One of the real challenges, though, is within the healthcare administration standpoint, there's really one set of CPT codes that pay for ABA therapy, and they pay for one form of ABA therapy, kind of not the lowest common denominator, but the most commonly administered form of ABA therapy. And so in a center like ours, where we're treating challenging behavior, we're using those same codes to bill for something where I need 3 staff per kid wearing full head to toe protective equipment. And we're trying to run that service based on the reimbursement rates that are applied for somebody who's got a high school degree working one-on-one with a child. And that really becomes a challenge for us. And it really limits our ability to scale those services.
So what I'm understanding from other conversations that we've had that the committee may not be aware of is that these services can be provided in clinic, they can be provided in home, and there's also some telehealth services that in this area, and there's a difference frequently in the quality of the care. Can you just briefly talk about that?
Sure. So the person who is implementing the actual individualized protocol for a child is called a registered behavior technician, requires a high school diploma, but they have to operate under the supervision of someone with at least a master's degree. That person with the master's degree oftentimes can provide that supervision no less than weekly, but in some cases that therapy happens out in the home where someone drives to the child's home and provides the RBT provides the therapy, and they're supervised remotely by someone in another location, in some cases in another state. And so that master's level interventionist who is really calling the shots on how the care is delivered to that child may never have laid physical eyes on that particular child, may have never been in that particular situation. There's also center-based interventions. This is what we do at our center, where if you come to our center, you'll see rooms that look like classrooms with kids who are working, and the therapists, the RBTs are right in the same building with those supervisors, and they're getting a higher level of care, we would argue, because there's someone who can directly oversee the intervention as it's being deployed. It's more efficient because you're making those judgment calls based on seeing what's happening in the moment. So we had previously offered the home-based service, thinking it would be more convenient to families. What we found was, first of all, the families have to be present. And so any family who works was unable to really access that home-based therapy. And then we just found that the supervision issue was not something that we felt was high enough quality for maintaining the standard of care that we want to operate.
And to be clear, the reimbursement for home services is currently higher than the reimbursement for in-clinic services. Is
That's my
that
understanding.
accurate?
There's a differential that is higher for home-based over center-based, even though obviously the expenses of a brick and mortar service model is higher.
So committee, you'll hear more about that.
Thank you, Madam Chair. I had a meeting about this with an advocate, and maybe I'm misremembering, but I took away from it that the reimbursement rate was also higher for the telehealth services.
Correct. That's my understanding as well. And oftentimes the telehealth is how the supervision is being administered.
And maybe the technician is there,
Correct.
but
The supervisor is remote.
thank you.
So just intuitively seems upside down. So I think we've got some work to do from that standpoint. Thank you so much for the work that
pleasure.
you do and for being with us today.
Yeah, thank you for the opportunity and for attention to these issues.
Okay, next we've got Alan Morgan from DBHDD and Dana Carroll from DHS. Come on up. You guys get close to the mic. We've got
All
people
right.
online, and thank you for being with us. Please introduce yourselves and the floor is yours.
Sure. Good morning, Madam Chair, and committee members. My name is Dana Carroll. I serve as the Deputy General Counsel for the Department of Human Services, Division of Family and Children Services. Thank you for giving us the opportunity to speak with the committee this morning. I'm joined here by my colleague from the Department of Behavioral Health and Developmental Disability, Deputy Assistant Commissioner for Field Operations North, Alan Morgan. And we are honored to be here to talk about the culmination of a 4-year joint project to ensure that youth with complex needs in DFACS care can transition successfully to DBHDD. First, to go through the agencies and people who are involved. First, we have the Department of Human Services, the Division of Family and Children Services. We provide foster care services to children and youth whose legal custody is vested in DHS or DFACS by the courts.
And then at DBHDD, we have specifically the Division of Intellectual and Developmental Disabilities, which offers treatment and support services to help people with intellectual and developmental disabilities and administers the NOW and COMP Medicaid waivers.
And of course, we have our young adults with complex needs. And so these are young adults who are over the age of 18 who have significant complex needs and will be unable to live independently as adults. And these are folks who are going to require often intensive treatment and residential services once they leave DFACS. So the goal for our collaboration was to determine how do we ensure that our young adults with significant complex needs who are eligible for a comprehensive waiver will be able to have housing and receive care and services after they age out of DFACS care. And we're calling that a DFACS to DBHDD transition for these youth. When I first came to the DFACS state office, I was hired as the child well-being attorney. My background in child welfare, as well as representing children and adults in Social Security, disability, and education advocacy settings, was beneficial in coming over as the child wellbeing attorney. And when hired, I was charged with figuring out how DFACS could better serve children with disabilities, specifically those who are between the ages of 18 and 21, who will not be able to live or function independently when they leave DFACS care. And when I began looking at the status of the planning for this population, it became clear that we needed to focus on some key areas of need. First, we needed a process to be able to identify and track children and youth who would likely require intensive services after they age out of DFACS. Next, we needed to ensure that applications for benefits like Social Security disability and waivers like the Now Comp waiver are filed. And we also needed to be able to provide support to our county staff to help them navigate these different agencies. So upon our collaboration with DBHDD, we were able to develop some solutions. So first, we developed an entirely new unit at the DFACS State Office. This is the Complex Needs Adult Transition Unit, or CNAT. CNAT has a lot of functions. Mainly, they do the following. They maintain a list of DFACS youth who will be transitioning onto Now Comp waivers, and we keep that list out. We say we start staffing around age 14, and as they get older toward age 18, we begin sharing that list with DBHDD. We provide ongoing consultations with counties for youth with complex needs who are going to require that significant support after age 21. We ensure that the youth have all the benefits that they're going to need to ensure a smooth transition over to Now Comp waivers. Within CNAT, we have a Social Security disability coordinator who aids the counties in filing applications and also following up with the Social Security Administration. And we have a transition planning coordinator who specifically coordinates with DBHDD to prepare and plan for the transition of our young adults out of DFACS care.
All right, so we were on parallel paths, I guess I would say, around the time Dana came in. At that time, I was Director of Field Operations for the state for the Division of Developmental Disabilities. And we began to see the magnitude of these needs on a case-by-case basis. So the things that Dana has described, that we'll describe, that we have put in place did not exist. And what there was, as a result of that, we had young people aging out of care who weren't ready to smoothly move into a comprehensive waiver. And we mentioned Now and comprehensive waivers. I'll say we speak mainly of comprehensive waivers here because that is the residential waiver. That's the higher funded waiver, and that's what these young adults will need. So the needs that we identified, again, identify and track young adults entering waiver services from DFACS care. That is one of the things we note on an application. If it comes in from DFACS, however, we often have cases where a family submitted that application, and to our earlier point, perhaps at some point that child moved into care. And so we had to collaborate with DFACS to make sure we catch every one of these young people and don't have an application that we're not aware of coming from DFACS. So we connected with DFACS at the state office actually to work through the issues that Dana has described with assessments, forms, process. And then we want to ensure residential resources are in place by the time that young person ages out. So what we had to do on our end, these solutions describe the problems we found. Regional field offices were directed not to close any DFACS applications for waiver without approval. Now, I'll explain that briefly. When we get an application in for waiver services, we may get that from a family that then moves out of state, or they cease responding to us in spite of letters, phone calls, and perhaps even visits to the home of record. At some point, we have to close those applications. And what had happened is DFACS applications would come in, and our staff were reaching out to that DFACS caseworker who might not be at the agency anymore. So we found that we had many applications that had been submitted, perhaps incomplete, and we had not been collaborating to get those through. So we issued a directive that those would not be closed without my approval, which would then involve me calling Dana to say, hey, tell me where this child is. Field offices maintain a very close relationship now with county DFACS offices and communicate regularly. They have a much more healthy relationship than they ever have. State level leadership reviews progress on the DBHDD and the CNAT cases regularly. We have a monthly meeting right now, and we have a list of people that we're following. We also made another change. Previously, our host homes, which for lack of a more short form way of describing it, is very much like an adult foster home for a person with developmental disabilities. It's a person with a waiver who lives in a family home setting, and they're funded through the waiver. Previously, those homes could not also have a foster child living in the home. So DFACS may have set up a foster home where you might even have siblings or two people that have lived together for quite some time. And when one of them ages into waiver, it was creating a problem. We were going to break up a family, essentially. So we removed that prohibition, and we had to put some processes in place to make that work smoothly. But now we do have host homes with adults in waiver who came out of foster care, who may still have that foster sibling, if you will, in the home and moving on forward in their life.
So the culmination of our four-year project came together this past August when our agencies were able to enter into a formal agreement to sort of codify these processes that we had developed. And so currently our CNAT unit at DFACS is tracking and consulting on over 250 youth who are in DFACS custody. And those are kids who have been identified to the unit by case managers, by their attorneys, by all sorts of sources. I have people email me all the time and say, is this child on the CNAT radar? Let me check. For 2025, we will have successfully transitioned 37 young adults from DFACS over to now Comp Waiver Services with DBHDD. That's 4 times more than we did last year. So we're seeing these processes at work. And I know we were both very proud in October when we were finally able to transition the last child or young adult who was over age 21, still in DFACS care, out of our care and over to DBHDD. At the beginning of the year, we had a list of about 20 young adults who were over the age of 21 who should not have been in DFACS care. But throughout the year, the CNAT team has been able to successfully work with the DBHDD offices and get all of those youth transitioned over to comprehensive waiver services. So we're seeing the process work.
And I will say that the biggest piece of this for, I think, both of us was an end to the finger pointing that may have gone on in the past, and simply building those relationships and collaborating and getting our heads together to say, from our side, we see this as a bureaucratic barrier. Can we remove that? And we did. And then from another perspective, hey, not having Social Security in place or not having supported decision-making in place creates problems. Can we solve that? And then we all just have worked together to solve these issues and to get these applications through earlier, to get to know these young people as we move them through our system, and to develop those residential placements. So it's gone very well these last 2 years in particular, and we look forward to it continuing.
Thank you so much. I have a question for each of you, but I want to just congratulate you on the collaboration between agencies. We work on that a lot because we're so siloed, and we need to eliminate redundancies and improve communication. And that's something we should work on every day. So I'm so happy that you guys have done that. Dana, I've never heard of a child well-being attorney, but I'm happy that's a thing. You mentioned the culmination of the project. What did you mean when you said that?
By that, I just meant the formal agreement that lays out all the processes between the agencies.
I guess we did not mention specifically that we.
Yeah, I think I mentioned it briefly, but it's just, so we have an MOU in place now that lays out the procedures that each agency is to follow when we have these kids with complex needs come to the attention of the CNAT unit at DBHDD, how we share that information across, when we share that information so that they can properly prepare for the next year's group that's going to be coming through and are going to need those waiver services. So that's what I meant with that formal document that we now have in place.
And I will say, working across different agencies, and I've been with the department for 18 and a half years, so I've seen a few things. That sharing of information is key, and it has, for a number of legal reasons, required a lot of work, and appropriately, because privacy is important. But the work that was done on that MOU to get that information sharing in place, it was wonderful to have.
Could you comment, Alan, a little bit on how this is different than the match group that deals with the complex?
I will say that match kids aren't necessarily limited to the intellectual and developmental disability folks. It's a bit broader group that may or may not fall into this category. There may be kids who aren't coming through quite the same process. So I would prefer for our children, youth, and families folks to do most of the discussion of match, but we do stay involved. My team is on the match, field operations team is on the match meetings regularly and continues to work on that. But these are kids that may not even be in that process. So you may have even this, because this is even the kids that aren't tremendously complex that may have fallen through the cracks previously. If there's an intellectual and developmental disability at all, then Dana's team makes sure we know about that kid so we can move them forward, even though they're in foster and they may not have that family advocating. DFACS is there advocating for them. So,
Thank you. Senator Payne.
Oh, yes. Thank you both. And I just want to join the celebration and cheering both of you for the marriage that's happened. And well, I say that because, the turf wars were always an issue, and I've always seen that as an issue. And sometimes you just want to scream saying the kid matters more than us. And so, but looking at the 4 times more than 2024 is huge, because that just tells you we're now seeing things we weren't seeing before, and also that no youth over the age of 21 in DFACS care. I mean, I want to jump up and down right now. So just thank you both for what you do. That's what I needed to say. Thank you.
thank you.
Thank you so much for being with us. Senator Hatchett, just raise your hand if you have anything to add anywhere along the way. Thanks.
Thank you, Senator Patrick.
Okay, and next, Polly McKinney is going to come up. Polly's been very patient because we've bumped her off of 2 previous agendas due to lack of time, and we're happy to see Polly here. And while she's getting her slides up, I want to thank the staff. I also want to introduce Daly Kennedy, who's replaced Hannah Holcomb as our administrative person, and then thanks so much to Senate Press, the Office of Policy and Legislative Analysis, OPLAW, formerly known as Senate Research, Kate from Legislative Council, and Enos from the Lieutenant Governor's Office. We've just had great support for this committee, and I greatly appreciate it. Thank you. Okay, Polly, floor is yours.
Okay, thank you. Hi, Polly McKinney, Advocacy Director at Voices for Georgia's Children. And before I get started, I just wanted to say Leslie Kelly was going to do this presentation for us, but has had a personal issue come up where she can't be with us today. But I just want to give her a shout out for doing all this work on this deck. And she actually could deliver this deck in 9.25 minutes. I'm not sure if I can do that, but I'll do my best. So we're basically taking on 3 subjects with this deck. We're taking on food insecurity, Medicaid access, and behavioral health supports. We did some work alongside empowerment from the Multi-Agency Alliance for Children from MAC, and did some foster youth and former foster youth focus groups, and have informed some of our recommendations based on those interactions with the young people. They were youth-led and came out of that. But some of it, a lot of it has to do also with our standard recs that we have in our primer and other things like that. I'm going to start with food insecurity and just some quick data. Former foster youth participate in SNAP at low levels. So in 2024, only 13% of former foster youth enrolled in SNAP at age 21. So that's just, and they're coming out of foster care, and it's a really important thing. And then the big beautiful bill eliminated some prior federal exemptions, which used to exempt former foster youth from having to have so many work requirements and things like that. And that we're concerned that may be a problem as that rolls out, because now they will have to report 80 hours of work, volunteering, or school attendance per month to receive SNAP benefits. And I've been told by some of our partners at Empowerment that in rural areas, that's particularly hard to come by for kids, or young adults. And we just believe that even if they can come by it, they're going to need some technical assistance to do the reporting. And so our recommendations are to improve technical assistance for SNAP application processes, including there's some simple low-hanging fruit things, how-to videos, social media campaigns, lists of organizations that are on like a website where kids can access them. And I say kids, but I know they're young adults, but I'm an old person, so I'm just had to fall into that pretty quickly. And also to require the care management organizations to help with food access through screening and benefits enrollment assistance, prepaid food cards, food boxes as value-added services. And again, just jump in if you have a question. I'm trying to be fast because I know you need to make up some time. You can see from this chart that as kids get older, they fall off of Medicaid enrollment. And there are a lot of reasons for that. They may not receive their notifications that they're eligible, because kids who age out of foster care are eligible. If they're in foster care at 18, they're eligible for Medicaid until they're 26. And so, but they don't stay enrolled, and because they may be moving, they may have a lot of housing insecurity, which I know this committee has already heard about. Obviously, 18-year-olds, even kids out of the foster care system, tend to mistrust systems and adults, but those who have been through a lot of systems may not trust that they're getting the services they need. And then also the gateway system is, if any of you have ever tried to use it, can be very cumbersome to enroll. And so with that, our recommendations to keep kids enrolled in Medicaid one is to ensure that data is checked across agencies. Some of the challenges that we face in collecting our recommendations were a lack of cross-agency communication. It was beautiful what we just saw with the DBHDD DHS presentation. We'd like to see a lot more of that and a lot better data sharing so that we can all know what's going on. Also, we'd like to see more communication to former foster youth and find some way to communicate with them about how to get enrolled, and then increase outreach assistance for technical assistance. And you can do that in public health centers and all kinds like food banks, hospitals. We can really improve our communication. And again, back to Gateway, we'd love to see Gateway run in its best possible way. Behavioral health, the kids in foster care and aging out of foster care are more likely to need behavioral health supports, but as many people do, face barriers, lack of providers that accept Medicaid. So we're always going to support anything that would help that be easier and more acceptable to behavioral health providers. A lack of complete health history. I think some of you have heard me talk about this before, and how kids need records that can move with them. And I know that DHS has been working on what we would call a health passport that can go with a child when they change placements, but I haven't seen it yet. I think it's supposedly pending, but we'd also like to see that passport be able to be taken by a youth aging out of foster care so that they know what their own health history is. Because a lot of kids just don't have access, and that stuff's hard to find, for an adult, like who hasn't been in foster care and hasn't had that many different placements, let alone a young person. Also, recurring themes of long wait times, a lack of trust, again, in systems due to bad experiences kids may have had when they were in foster care, placement disruptions, misdiagnoses, over medication to control behaviors, and then a lack of Medicaid coverage or denial for other modalities, so equine therapy, different kinds of newer therapies that young people would like to try rather than medications, for instance. Recommendations, incentivize combining primary care with behavioral health care so that when doing integrated care so that when a person shows up at a primary care office for physical health, there's also a behavioral health option. We think that just makes life infinitely easier for people and more effective. And streamline insurer provider certification processes to encourage more providers to accept public and private health insurance for behavioral health, require CMOs to create, again, the electronic healthcare passport, and then require CMOs to cover alternative therapeutic modalities, as I mentioned before, the equine therapy, art therapy, music therapy, and enforce parity, which I know is something everybody's heard about for a long time, so that behavioral health is treated equally to physical health. And then we have some general recommendations to provide funding to programs like LifeSet with Youth Villages, Up3 in Atlanta, MAC Leads program, which has a fabulous track record of helping kids graduate high school. Ensure that programs for transition age youth, such as independent living and extended youth foster care services, are well funded. And then this slide is a little bit inaccurate, which I learned this today talking to our friends at Empowerment. There is a DHS Youth Advisory Council, but the young people, from what I understand, would like to see a more independent advisory council so that their recommendations are clean when they make them to the agency, and so the agency can hear in perhaps a more pure way about how the agencies can work better together, like we just saw. And also, one thing that was really important to the young folks was to encourage CMOs to work with the young people to access mobile phone benefits. A lot of young people aging out of foster care do not have cell phones. And therefore, so say, for instance, calling 988 or setting up appointments or going on Gateway, like all of those things become infinitely harder without a tool. And the federal government used to fund cell phones for youth. It was a little tricky to get. Then they took that benefit away recently, and then they just reinstated it, but it's really confusing, and it would be nice to have a more clear way to do that. And with that, I'm happy to take any question to the best of my ability.
Thank you, Polly. You know, things change quickly.
Yeah.
And one of the things that happened November 13th, 4 days ago, was an executive order called Fostering the Future
Yes.
for American Children and Families. And I'll just briefly say what it's supposed to do. It aims to improve the foster care system by modernizing data systems, expanding educational and employment opportunities for transition age youth, and strengthening partnerships with faith-based and other organizations. This is spearheaded by First Lady Melania Trump, and it also seeks to increase flexibility in certain programs like education and training vouchers, and improve data accuracy to better track and support youth in care. So all of those are things we've talked about in this committee, and it'll be very interesting as the various experts in this area slice and dice what the executive order is really going to do with our programs, particularly here in Georgia, and how we as a state can take the most advantage of whatever the nuts and bolts of those programs are going to be. Did you have any comment about that?
Not about that in particular. And I did see that executive order the other day, and we just didn't have time to incorporate it in our notes. But I will say that one of the things that a number of us, even some folks in this room, have been talking about is integrated eligibility systems. So when you look at SNAP and Medicaid, the legislature a few years ago passed a bill around express lane eligibility, where when you apply for Medicaid, you would automatically be considered for SNAP, which would be really helpful for many people, including former foster youth. But we'd like to make sure that we'd like to get some data on if that works or not, and how well it's working. And if it's not working, why is it not working? And also, then I know that in the legislation, I believe it also included looking forward into integrated eligibility systems for TANF, and for some other benefits that would be really helpful for people as they start families and as they age up. And I think that that's something that could be a part of this conversation very handily. And so I just want to kind of throw that out there.
Yeah, you bring up a great point, and that is we pass laws all the time, and then what happens to them on the other end
Right.
is not always clear, and it doesn't always happen the way that we envisioned it when we passed the bills. So that's a little bit of a separate issue, but definitely plays into what we're talking about.
Yeah, it's important to like remember to ask a question afterwards. That's what I always have to remind myself. Then what happened to that money? You know,
Right,
what
exactly.
happened? So
Senator Parent, did you?
Thank you, Madam Chair. For individuals, both former foster youth and even others, in terms of applications for these programs, and you know, if and when the needing to put in the 80-hour work or volunteer or schooling requirement for SNAP goes into effect, do these programs have good mobile phone app interfaces that are easy to use?
I'm going to look around to my friends at Empowerment.
Now, it has been difficult for people to be able to get the paperwork and everything for those requirements submitted. And sometimes they'll do the benefits while it's waiting to be processed. And then they'll have benefits again, and then it can be considered.
Can you sort of summarize that, Polly? Because
Yeah, so she was saying that while people are getting their paperwork to submit, it gets more complicated and it may not be as streamlined as we would hope. As far as the actual app, I'll have to get back to you. I'll talk to our nutrition expert, Kelsey Silvio at Voices, and see if she's got any information around mobile phone access. I know that some of the challenges is also communication, not just the uploading of information, all of that, but the like getting the call back, getting the reminder, you know, if we do reminder text, do you have a way to receive them? I mean, so there's a lot of, I don't want to say antiquated, but like things do move so fast that to keep up with it and to have the funding to make apps and to do all this stuff, I would have to defer to the agencies, honestly, to let us know where they are with things. Cause like, I know they're working on a health passport, but it's been a few years in the making. And so I don't, you know, when does it roll out? Is it rolling out? Is it what the kids need? So I know it doesn't currently have a plan, I don't think, to travel, for instance, with young people. So to ask for that is a whole nother technological step, right? So, but I'll talk to Kelsey and to our research and policy director, Melissa Haberlin DeWolf, and get some information on what apps are out there for the state if the agencies don't come forward with them themselves.
yeah, and I'll take this opportunity to just say that whatever information anybody wants to submit to the committee, we're going to need that today. So please email anything additional that you want to send us, because we're working on a report
We'll get right.
right after this meeting. Thank you. Senator Payne.
Yes, thank you, Polly, for being here, and just you and I know and understand by your own admission of calling these kids. And I've told, until the world starts understanding that, you know, and I ask people all the time, how would you like be held accountable for today for how you thought before the age of 25? Because, you know, our frontal lobes come in our mid-20s. That's when we all wake up in our mid-20s one day and think, my God, my parents are the smartest people on the face of the earth. As I said, and it's not a psychological, it's a physical occurrence. And so, but just, you know, I just want to say that's why I'm jumping up and down to see that the world are now starting to see that these under 25-year-olds are still going through all these issues. It's still developmental. It's not just a matter of, you know, and now the world's starting to see that. So I just want to say you were right on by calling them kids.
Well, and I wouldn't call them children, right? For me, there's a, you know, I mean, but my 94-year-old mother, who's probably watching this right now, might call us all children at this point. So just saying.
Thank you, Polly.
Thank you.
And next, I need Jerry Bruce to come up here from the Office of the Child Advocate. Thanks for being with us.
No, I don't have any slides. Thank you, Madam Chair, members of the committee. The Office of the Child Advocate is kind of a weird agency because we're not really providing services to anybody on the front end. We're doing investigations usually and trying to work on system improvement for kids in our foster care system. So I have a different perspective than a lot of people do. And I just want you to think for a minute of the child welfare legal system as some very complicated entity. I mean, the two most common things I use are the human body and like a 3-masted old-time sailing ship, where you have to be aware that when you do things to one part, it may have unintended consequences on a part you don't see or think about sometimes. They're not necessarily easy to take a unified view of, and to have things work the way they should, it takes an almost sort of symphonic cooperation to really make things happen. Y'all are looking specifically at the issues of transition age youth. And in our code, by the way, Georgia's juvenile code is a model for the rest of the country. So we're very happy to have the juvenile code we have now. Of course, it has things that might need to be tweaked, but it's a great code. And one of the things that it does very, very well is it takes an extremely intentional approach to how courts are to ensure that youth in foster care are receiving the services they need as they approach that transition age. So at every stage after an adjudication hearing where a court has adjudicated a child dependent, once that child turns 14 years of age, that child's case plan has to include a lot of very specific information about the services that child's going to receive to begin that child's potential transition to an adult at 18. Sometimes they're going to age out of care. Sometimes they're going to achieve permanency before that. But there's a very intentional statutory scheme that y'all have provided for us to look at this and to have conversations about it when the case plan's first devised, at the initial review hearing, at every other periodic review hearing, at the annual permanency hearing. So again and again and again, courts are required to make specific findings with regard to these services. They're required to consider a specific type of case plan that provides services for these older youth. And I think it's my unfortunate duty to tell you that your laws and requirements with regard to this age of youth are not being complied with in our juvenile courts. It's just not happening. You know that. Maybe you do. You need to be aware of it as you think about legislation. I mean, you have to work on services. You have to work on making sure that there's adequate funding. You can't stop thinking about the things you're thinking about, but you also have to be aware that in very many places in Georgia, youth are not receiving any of the things that they're required to receive. And everybody wants to say, well, it's a child welfare system. So, what can we do to make DFACS do better? Well, in my view, this is not a DFACS issue. This is an issue of judicial responsibility. I spent time as a juvenile court judge. I spent time as an attorney for DFACS. I'm well aware of the challenges that are facing our system out there. But we have to be aware that without this intentional approach, children are sometimes aging out of care completely unprepared for adult life without the knowledge of the things that they need. And I always tell people that our juvenile court system is a real cycle of accountability, right? The judge is clearly the most bang for the buck in this cycle of accountability. All the parties in the courtroom rise or fall to the expectations of the judge, right? In areas, we have bright spots all around the state where judges are familiar with the law. They eat, read, and sleep the law. They understand it. They hold the parties accountable. The parties come to court prepared. We have a lot of places in the state where that is not the case. And this area of transitional youth is one of the most frequent falling through the cracks area in our juvenile courts. The reason we have that, though, going on is that in most of our juvenile courts, we do not have advocates who are prepared to stand up and challenge courts and to hold them accountable. I learned in my time on the bench that one of the best sort of modifiers of judicial behavior is enlightened, professional, dedicated advocacy going on in the courtroom in front of you, right? That's the thing that can change judicial behavior more than anything else. And in most jurisdictions in our state, the lawyers representing parents and children who would be expected to raise these issues and to press them are actual contractors of the court. They're almost employees of the judges. The judges approve their pay. The judges appoint them or refuse to appoint them. And I've been told again and again and again by lawyers across the state at trainings, I love to do all this stuff you're telling me to do, but if I go back to my jurisdiction and start this stuff, I'm going to lose my job. Right? So we need to be aware that I'm going to tie this in with a statement I made to the Senate Study Committee on Adoption and Foster Youth 2 years ago, that we have a crisis in advocacy in our courtrooms, in our juvenile courts. And until we address that crisis in advocacy and ensure that we have dedicated, informed, and professional advocates representing parents and children in these cases, all the legislation in the world is not going to help our transition age youth or any of the other youth in foster care, because this, unfortunately, this issue of transition age youth and lack of compliance with the law by judges is just one aspect of that. There are so many others. I could talk about the presumption for unsupervised visits. I could talk about the application of the rules of evidence, all kinds of different things. And what we need is a dedicated, responsible set of advocates who are there to work on that. And I'll go ahead and blow OCA's horn for a moment to say that we've been working with DFACS and with several jurisdictions across the state to provide those counties with some reimbursements from federal 4E funds from the Social Security Act to help reimburse them for a portion of their costs for the advocates. The quid pro quo being that we want to help them train their advocates, help oversee their advocates, help professionalize their advocates. But again, these are ultimately stopgap measures. And so this is not a thing that, I can say, thank you so much for going and solving this problem this afternoon. It's not going to happen that way. But if we don't start this conversation about how we can increase compliance with statutory requirements, then we're never going to be able to fix the holes below the waterline. And we're always going to have a ship that's sort of leaky and sailing and listing to one side.
Yeah, so just to follow up on that, I ask everyone who's testifying to bring us some solutions because if we know what the problem is, we've also got to know some options for how to fix that. And the judiciary is obviously a separate branch of government. So we're going to need some ideas. And as you know, we don't fix everything at the same time. Most of the time, we kind of take bites of the apple and move the ball down the field. So if you have any thoughts about specific things that we need to be doing or thinking about as legislators, we'd love to hear them.
Sure. I'd be happy to have, those are longer than 10 minutes. I will say a big word of thanks to the Senate and the Office of the Lieutenant Governor, who a couple of sessions ago gave us a Senate resolution urging counties and courts to work with the Office of the Child Advocate to sign up for this 4E reimbursement program, our quality legal representation program. And we've had several more counties sign on after that right now. But, we're an office of 9 people totally, and now we're juggling a growing number of courts and counties who want to sign on because they realize this is a problem and they want to improve the quality of their legal representation.
So do you think that, we passed a bill, I don't know what year, Senate Bill 401, that had to do with data reporting back from the juvenile courts. And what we learned in the process of that is that there were a number of counties who were not really reporting anything. And so that's why that law was passed. And there's been a project ongoing about that because if we don't have the data, we don't know where the problems are, where we need to focus. So do you have any thoughts about the data reporting piece of it?
I have a lot of thoughts about that. And you remember, I helped write that code. So it's something that's very near and dear to my heart. And we still don't have, I'm working with the AOC right now to make sure that we can review the first run of data that came in, but we still don't have sort of anything close to a sort of active dashboard of data that would allow us to look and see what's going on in the different jurisdictions. So until we have every juvenile court in the state reporting data on every case they have, so that we know how many termination of parental rights cases are pending right now, so that people who have appropriate access to that can pull up the case plans in those cases and look at them and see what's going on. We work with DFACS right now. DFACS provides my office with a lot of that information, but DFACS doesn't have that information if the court hasn't provided it to them yet. So sometimes court orders are missing and things like that. So any approach by the legislature to a real sort of muscular data reporting system for our juvenile courts will be a win for the kids that we're trying to serve. Because it's hard to diagnose problems based on hearsay.
Exactly. And yet you've been around long enough to kind of know how things work around here. And for years, the data was transmitted only to the administrative office of the courts, what there was of it. And now it's supposed to be reported to the General Assembly as well. So more eyes on it may help. And we did throw some money at that project. I need to touch base with the people that are working on it. You may know how close we are to having that first run of data.
I think I've just had some communication from the AOC about my access to that data, and I just haven't had time to follow up yet. So I think I may have access to it, but I haven't looked at it yet.
Well, any,
I'm happy to do anything I can to assist this committee or anybody else working on our issues in our juvenile courts.
yeah,
Because I don't want to just say, oh, things are terrible, we can't fix it. We actually have a huge impact on outcomes for kids in care. But we have to be willing to address some of the unpleasant aspects of non-compliance that are going on out there. We don't have a real method of accountability for our legal system.
thank you so much
Sure.
for highlighting that for us. Thanks for being with us. Okay, our next presenter is on Zoom. Dr. DeGarmo, are you there?
Yes, ma'am, I am. Thank you so much.
Okay, you're on a clock. We're
I
getting,
understand. I'm going to keep it brief.
introduce yourself and proceed.
Thank you so much. So I'm Dr. John DeGarmo, founder and director of the Foster Care Institute, and I'm going to just bring up my screen here so I can share the presentation with you. But very briefly, I have the pleasure of working with foster care programs and agencies across the state and of course across the country. And I've been a foster parent myself to over 60 plus children here in Georgia, many of them who have transitioned out of the system. I just want to confirm, please, if you can see that screen there.
Yep, we got you.
Okay, fantastic. I also want to thank you for the opportunity to speak, and I want to thank those who came beforehand. They addressed a lot of issues. I want to just very briefly mention some people mentioned the behavioral issues. I think we're in a time of a mental health crisis right now in our nation. Our children and our youth are at the forefront, and many of the youth who are transitioning out of foster care are struggling with those mental health issues so much more than beforehand. This Thursday, I'll be meeting with the Assistant Secretary of Children and Families in Washington, D.C., Alex Adams, to address some of these very, very same issues related to the executive order that was signed last week. But very, very briefly, I just want to touch on some of the challenges youth face when they age out of foster care system. For so many of these kids, school has failed them. Of course, we know 55% drop out of school. Their family has failed them. The foster care system has failed them. Youth in foster care do not want to be in foster care. They want to leave the system. And as a result, 55% drop out. Only 6% will go to college. Only 2% will graduate with a 4-year degree. And the challenges, they struggle finding work. They struggle financially. Many of them turn to a life of crime. Many of them end up homeless. There are health problems, healthcare problems. Many of them end up pregnant. Many of them turn to drugs. They struggle with social skills. They struggle with living skills. They have a lack of support. They have a lack of resources. I was just in California this past weekend. I was telling foster parents, I said, can you imagine having an 18-year-old child, kicking him out of the house and they turn 18 and say, hey, you're on your own. No support services, no one to talk to. And that's what happens to so many of these youth when they turn 18. 65% will end up homeless. 75% will end up incarcerated at some point. 39% will end up pregnant by 21 years of age. And for their children, it's generational. Most likely, those children will turn to foster care as well. 2 of the 3 I've adopted are 3rd generation foster care from here in Georgia, which means their parents and their grandparents were also in the foster care system, and the system failed them in some way. And of course, there are those mental health issues. Depression. We're seeing a 70% increase in teenage suicide attempts since the lockdowns of 2020. High levels of anxiety, and of course, as I mentioned earlier, which I believe to be the real pandemic, that is mental health. And many of them will become victims of online predators. Some of those youth who are struggling to find some sort of connection will turn to gangs and, of course, prostitution as well. So we can see that there are many, many dangers facing those in foster care when they transition out of the system. I want to quote Davida, who was in foster care herself, and she said this: I was homeless for 2 years. The majority of the time I stayed in shelters. I constantly moved. During the day, we had to be out in the community, which made it difficult due to the summer heat. I was sometimes hungry. The challenges of being homeless were being hungry, not having the luxury of showering when needed, and knowing that I wasn't completely safe. And this, again, is a former foster youth who experienced homeless when she transitioned out of the foster care system. And as I mentioned, I've had several youth in my home who've transitioned out as well, and some of them have struggled with that very same thing. So how can we help? How can we help these youth who are truly struggling with education, with support services, with mental health, with incarceration, etc.? Well, I'm just going to touch on this very, very briefly because I know you have limited time here. We can offer some of these kids, and you know what? You don't have to be a foster parent. You don't have to be a caseworker. It can take the entire community to help these youth in foster care when they age out. We can have mentor programs throughout the state, mentor programs that teach these youth important job skills to help them with personal development opportunities, to teach them how to fill out job resumes, etc., to teach them job interview skills, and to teach them jobs as well. I often tell businesses, they say to me, hey, how can we help? How can we help these kids? I tell them, well, hire one. Hire them when they age out the system and be a mentor for them. I'm a big fan of the independent living program. I think it's an invaluable program. I'm sure you're all familiar with it, so I will not dive into that now. They need to learn career development skills, as I mentioned earlier. Help with something as simple as a job resume or teach them job interview skills. We're in the day and age of computers and technology, both good and bad. There's a great opportunity, and this is touched on in the executive order that was signed by President Trump this past Thursday, computer science education. But if we taught these youth computer skills, the world is open to them for possible job opportunities. There are several programs designed to help with housing. These include the Family Unification Program, the HUD program, through the HUD, the Chafee program, which gives states money. There's lots of them. Here in Georgia, there is the Christian City Thrive program, which gives these youth opportunities for housing. We know how expensive housing is for today, but if they can get some help in some way to have this transitional style housing. I know of a group here in Georgia that has been communicating with me about the possibility of opening up small or tiny homes and donating them to youth in foster care when they age out of the system. In fact, there are some programs across the country that do just that. They donate these tiny homes, these small homes, if you will, to youth who have aged out of the foster care system, and they have that home available to them. Another way that they need to be prepared, and we can help, whether it's the state, whether it's private agencies, whether it's businesses, whether it's people just simply want to volunteer, is to teach these children some sort of financial responsibility. Many youth don't know how to do something as simple as opening up a personal bank account or balancing a budget, but they need, of course, those financial skills, and many of them don't have it. When youth come to my home, those teens come to my home, so many of them don't have the basics of financial responsibility, of financial skills. They need to learn important living skills, learn how to shop for healthy foods and diets. They need to learn how to cook and to simple cleaning and first aid skills. And again, these can be taught to these youth so they don't end up struggling with other issues. Of course, we mentioned only 6% will go to college, only 2% will graduate with a four-year degree, but 55% will drop out of school, which means more than half will drop out of high school. So we need to encourage them to get that secondary education degree. And then we need to help them apply for colleges. As I noted earlier, when they turn 18 years of age, who helps them? Well, we can help them with simply filling out college applications and going to college. You know, when 2020 happened and the lockdowns occurred and the colleges shut down, what many people did not understand or expect was those youth in college, in the dorms, that was their home. That was their home, so they ended up homeless. So college is for some of them is not only an education, but it's also a home. And there are other opportunities that youth in foster care can learn as well. They don't have to go to college. There's military, and what a wonderful opportunity for youth in foster care to join the military. It gives them stability, it gives them structure, it gives them home, it gives them careers, it gives them the opportunity to learn new skills, and of course, maybe even travel overseas. And they can also go to technical school as well. You know, we had a youth in foster care who came to our home, graduated from high school, and now he is living in Minnesota, and he is working for Delta Airlines as an airline technician and airline engineer, if you will. When they age out of the system, there can be after-school programs in the communities that can help them to get through high school. When they leave high school, if they go to college, maybe some businesses, organizations can help them with school supplies or scholarship funds, if you will, or maybe simply donating some gift cards or certificates to college bookstores. And of course, for many youth in the age of the foster care system, they have nothing. They have nothing of their own except the clothes in their back. So if they are able to get some type of housing, well, we can help them with household goods, furnitures, kitchen appliances, etc., and transportation. Many of these youth do not have a car, but if they're going for a job interview, well, they need transportation. So we can help them with transportation. Again, this does not have to rest on the government. Everybody can come together to help these youth. Businesses, charity organizations, faith-based organizations. And for those businesses, they can help youth in foster care by perhaps providing them discounts on services. As I mentioned earlier, hiring them, training them, and developing them with important job skills. Faith-based organizations have the opportunity as well. I often tell faith-based organizations that there is a mission field in our own backyard. We don't have to go to Honduras or Nicaragua or Mexico, and I've done all that. But when there's a mission field in our own backyard, in every single community, there is children suffering. So there's an opportunity for faith-based organizations to have their own foster care program, ministry outreach program, if you will, and they can volunteer. They can provide support services for youth who age out, or food or clothing, again, kitchenware, furniture, household goods, donations, mentorship, etc. There's that saying, it takes a village. Well, when it comes to youth in foster care, it truly does take a village. Again, I wanted to keep this very, very short because I know that you have a deadline. I dive into this in much more detail in many of my webinars, books, etc. I'd love to answer any questions that you might have at this time. But as I tell legislators and before, to me, this is not a goods or services. This is youth and children. So to me, there should be a sense of urgency for these children because they're our future, if you will. Again, thank you so much for the opportunity. I'm so appreciative of the leadership you have done in this area, Senator Kirkpatrick. I appreciate what you're doing, and I'm grateful for your advocacy.
Thank you, Dr. DeGarmo. I just want to thank you for highlighting the role of the community and the non-governmental organizations. We've done a lot at the government level, and that's not enough. And it's going to take everybody. The government can't fix all this by itself. So it's not always just throwing money at it. We've seen the value of communication and everyone working together. So thank you very much for your presentation.
You're welcome. I just want to add, you said not throwing money at it. I completely agree. But so many people ask me, how can I help? And so many in the community don't know how they can help. So perhaps one thing we can all do to come together is to bring more awareness of how we can help youth. If we could go community and say, hey, in your area, there are youth in foster care who have aged out, and this is how you can help us help these youth. Again, thank you so much, ma'am.
Okay. Next, Zach Blend from Goshen Valley. Come on up.
Thank you, Madam Chairman and committee members. My name is Zach Blend, and for the past 10 years, I've had the privilege of serving as the Chief Executive Officer of the Goshen Valley Foundation. I also serve as the chairman of the Together Georgia Foundation, which advocates for child welfare providers that make up the backbone of Georgia's care network. Goshen Valley was founded in 1999, and over that time, we've served over 1,600 children and youth. We occupy a unique space in Georgia's child welfare system. We may be the only organization in the state that simultaneously holds contracts as a CCI, CPA, ILP, DJJ provider, and also serves as a core provider through our Family Resource Center in Canton. For the last 13 years, we've served young people who are aging out of the foster care system through our ILP program, Goshen New Beginnings. There are many topics that we could cover this morning, but I want to focus my remarks on a few areas that I believe can be meaningful, make a meaningful difference, areas where the state and provider community can work hand in hand to change the trajectory for youth aging out of care, absent the need of additional appropriations. First, we must emphasize permanency before 18. When a youth turns 16, We must do everything possible to identify permanency options. The best way to combat the aging out crisis is to limit its size. Every young person deserves to know that someone is waiting for them when they come home, that there's a place where they belong. Providers should be required, including Goshen, to partner with DFACS to identify mentors, supportive kin, or potential adoptive families before the youth turns 18. Goshen stands ready to partner with other providers across Georgia to build those connections earlier and more intentionally. The second focus area is ensuring strong support for those who will age out of care and transition into adulthood without permanent family connections. We can't eliminate every instance of aging out, but we can make sure that when it happens, it's not a free fall. There are 4 practical areas I'd like to highlight. First, mental health education and access. Every youth aging out of care should be fully educated, not just informed, on how to access Medicaid-funded mental health services currently offered through AmeriGroup, which are available until age 26. We know that nearly all young people in care have endured some degree of trauma. Many will face depression, anxiety, post-traumatic stress once they're on their own, but too often they don't realize they're still eligible for therapy or counseling after leaving care. Of late, there are more and more youth growing out of foster care with a dual diagnosis of mental health and autism, which was highlighted earlier today, which increases their need for such support. Simply, before a youth transitions, someone, whether it's a case manager, a provider, or both, should walk them through how to access these resources step by step. It's one of the simplest, most cost-effective ways to prevent crisis. Number 2, driving education and access. It may sound basic, but I can't overstate how transformative it is when a young person learns to drive. A driver's license equals mobility, employment, and independence. Without one, they're often stuck, limited where they can walk or which friends can give them a ride. We can solve this problem by building an incentive program for licensed ILP agencies that help youth obtain licenses, initially permits, driver's training, insurance, and ultimately a license. This is not an easy process, but the right system can make driving obtainable for aging out youth. Number 3, employment pathways. Simply put, we must open more employment pathways. We should work closely with local employers and, even more importantly, with county and state agencies to create incentives for hiring youth with foster care experience. A recent example close to home, one of our Goshen youth who aged out following a failed adoption was hired by the Cherokee County Fire Department. He's now training to become a full-time firefighter. That kind of success story, we should replicate statewide. Youth moving from served by the system to serving the community. Goshen is ready to invest time and resources into helping build these pipelines, particularly into public safety, trade, and state government positions. 4, expanding innovative services. We must continue to support and expand initiatives like the Fostering Success Tax Credit. These funds are a lifeline. They provide direct assistance for housing, transportation, and living expenses, allowing young people to focus on education and career building rather than pure survival. At Goshen, we've worked hard to engage our donor base and our local community, not only to maximize the benefit of the tax credit, but to raise awareness and create opportunities that last long after the youth leaves our care. Programs like this work best when the state, providers, and communities set themselves up as partners in creating safety nets that are sustainable, not dependent solely on government appropriations. I'll close with this thought. Aging out of foster care is daunting. The cards often feel stacked against these young people. No family, little money, and limited support. But I believe that we're really looking at it as a crisis, but more so as a set of opportunities. Opportunities for the state and providers to partner in new ways, opportunities for communities to step in and wrap around these youth, and opportunities for each young person to rewrite their story, from being a recipient of care to becoming a contributor to society. Imagine a Georgia where every youth leaving foster care has a mentor, has a counselor, a driver's license, a job, and a safe place to live. That's achievable, and it doesn't require massive new spending. It requires alignment, partnership, and intentionality. That's the future we're working towards at Goshen Valley, and it's one I believe Georgia can lead the nation in achieving. Thank you for your time, your leadership, and your commitment to the children and families of this state.
Thank you, Zach, and thanks for your leadership. I'm struck by so many of our people that have provided testimony to the committee and the power of individuals who are fired up about whatever the subject matter is. You really can make a difference, and you are making a difference. You'd probably be happy to hear that we passed the Senate Bill 85, that provides for a foster care scholarship program, and that so far hasn't been funded, but you'll hear more about that
That's wonderful.
soon. And if you could submit your remarks to me, and then we'll share them with
Absolutely.
the committee and make it part of our record.
I'll send them to you by the end of the day.
Thank you so much.
Thank you.
Okay, next we have Jennifer Justice from Wendy's Wonderful Kids, and she is on Zoom. Jennifer, can you hear me?
Yes, can you hear me?
Yes, you
And
have
can
the.
you-
Thank you.
Thank you. Can you see the PowerPoint?
Yeah.
Great, thank you. Thank you and good morning, Madam Chair and members of the committee, for the opportunity to speak today. My name is Jennifer Justice, and I serve as the Senior Vice President of Program and Business Development at the Dave Thomas Foundation for Adoption. We're here to highlight the success of Wendy's Wonderful Kids program in Georgia, and to talk about how we can expand this work so that more young people find permanent, loving homes. The Dave Thomas Foundation for Adoption is a national nonprofit dedicated to finding permanent homes for children waiting in foster care. Founded in 1992, Wendy's founder, Dave Thomas, who was himself adopted, the foundation works through evidence-based programs and partnerships guided by the core belief that every child is adoptable. Our signature program, Wendy's Wonderful Kids, focuses on the children that have been waiting the longest. These youth are older, they may be part of a sibling group, and they're children with special needs. Wendy's Wonderful Kids supports recruiters who use a child-focused recruitment model that's proven to be up to 3 times more effective at finding permanent homes than typical approaches. Across the US and Canada, more than 550 adoption recruiters are implementing the model in nearly all states, including in Georgia. Together, this work has helped over 15,500 children and youth achieve legal permanency. That success is possible because of partnerships, including with Georgia's Department of Human Services and Bethany Christian Services, who have been instrumental here in Georgia. This model focuses on finding the right family for each child. Recruiters center the youth's voice and begin by exploring existing relationships, people that these youth know and love. It could be friends, family, teachers, or coaches. The result can be adoption, legal guardianship, reunification, or reinstatement of parental rights if it's safe to do so. Children served by Wendy's Wonderful Kids are 1.7 times more likely to be adopted, and older children are up to 3 times more likely to be adopted. Even youth who initially said they didn't want to be adopted often change their minds once trust is built with a recruiter. This model works, and the data proves it. In Georgia, the average youth referred to Wendy's Wonderful Kids is 14 years old. They have spent 5 years in foster care and have had, on average, 6 placements prior to referral. Many are part of a sibling group and are children of color, and 1 in 5 have already experienced a failed adoption. These are the hardest to place youth, but also the ones who need permanency the most. Through the partnership with the state and Bethany Christian Services, there are 8 recruiters serving youth across Georgia. They've helped more than 355 children achieve legal permanency. And in total, 699 children have been served or are currently being served. Yet nearly 450 children in Georgia's foster care system need this service and aren't receiving it. 8 recruiters cannot meet the statewide demand. With additional investment in more recruiters in your high need regions, we could reach hundreds more youth. Each youth who finds permanency represents not only a lifelong family, but is also achieving better outcomes for Georgia. It equates to reduced homelessness, reduced incarceration, and stronger communities. Achieving legal permanency saves taxpayers money now and into the future. Since 2006, the foundation has invested nearly $6 million in Georgia with continued annual support. Our state and agency partners have matched this commitment, making this a shared investment and a shared success that's both effective and sustainable. You've heard powerful testimony about housing, education, and employment during these hearings, and those services matter. But what young people consistently tell us is this: what they wanted most was a loving, consistent adult who doesn't go away. Aging out is not a plan, and permanency is prevention. Stable family connections reduce homelessness, victimization, and justice system involvement. Services are stronger when youth have family behind them. So I'd like to make 3 recommendations respectfully today. First, invest in additional Wendy's Wonderful Kids recruiter positions to cover the areas of greatest need and those youth that are older and with special needs. Second, require that every youth have a current permanency strategy, not just services, that is reviewed at each court and administrative review hearing. And finally, limit the use of PPLA or APLA to truly rare cases with leadership oversight. And finally, I'd like to close with the story of Jake, a young man from Georgia who aged out of the foster care system. And he wasn't part of Wendy's Wonderful Kids, but said he wished he would have been, because in his words, I needed someone who would be there for me no matter what. Jake went on to earn his bachelor's degree and is now pursuing a master's in public administration, thanks to his hard work and programs like Georgia's Fostering Success Act. He's doing well, but he says his journey was harder than it should have been. Jake's story reminds us that while programs and services matter, it's people and family that change a life's trajectory. Georgia has already built a strong foundation through partnership, and with your leadership, we can make legal permanency the standard and not the exception. Thank you so much for your time today and your commitment to Georgia's young people, and I'm happy to take any questions.
Thank you, Jennifer, and thanks for the work y'all are doing. I was going to point out that you guys sent me an email that I think November 22nd is National Adoption Day, which is Saturday. So hopefully we can all highlight that on our social media and such. Can you tell us what APLA, what that acronym is? I don't think I'm familiar with that.
Sure. Apology for the acronym, Madam Chair. APLA is the newest version of what used to be long-term foster care. It's another permanent plan living arrangement. It is considered a legal permanency option, federally and at states. But it's basically a plan for children to age out of foster care.
Thank you. We know that this year is going to be challenging from a budget standpoint due to the backfilling of some of the federal cuts. And so we greatly appreciate the partnerships that we have with the non-governmental organizations. So thank you for making yourself available today.
Thank you.
Okay, and last but not least, Lauren Paget from KSU. We had a presentation at our last meeting, one from University of Georgia and another from the Technical College System, and then learned that you guys have an impressive program at KSU as well. So the floor is yours.
Thank you, Madam Chair and members of the community or the committee. I'm sorry. My name is Lauren Paget. I serve as Executive Director of Care Services and Health Promotion and Wellness at Kennesaw State University. And I'm excited to share with you what we're doing at Kennesaw State, and not only at Kennesaw State, but around the state of Georgia and around the country, in helping develop programs to support youth who've aged out of foster care in their pursuit of higher education.
Speak loudly. We've got people online who need to hear you too.
So Care Services at Kennesaw State provides comprehensive basic needs support for students who are experiencing homelessness, food insecurity, or who experience the foster care system. We have a model that includes a basic needs pantry with food, hygiene items, technology, school supplies. We have resource navigators, so very similar to case management, who provide those wraparound services for students during their time at Kennesaw State. Emergency financial assistance for students facing an unexpected financial hardship, and partnerships on and off campus that connect students to safe housing, which we know is a significant barrier, transportation and other essentials, including enrolling in public benefits, which we've talked about today as well. We know that these supports specifically are often the difference between staying enrolled or stopping or dropping out, especially for students who were in the foster care system. We at Kennesaw State have two kind of aligned but distinct programs that are identified in the handouts that you have. So the Ascend program is specifically for students who experienced homelessness while they were in high school, so McKinney-Vento identified students, or who experienced the foster care system. This program includes Bridge Week, which is an early arrival program where students get to come to campus a week early, learn about the supports and resources on campus. We have targeted workshops, so things like learning how to get internships or mental health supports available on and off campus. We have opportunities for our Ascend scholars to travel abroad as well as within the country. So last year they took a trip to DC as a cohort, and we had 2 scholars who visited Cambridge as well. So really trying to help them in their academic pursuits. We have peer and professional mentoring and individualized case management specifically for this population. The Ascend Center, which is another of the handouts that you have, is the training, research, and accreditation arm of what we do. So we help institutions across the USG system, the Technical College System of Georgia, as well as across the nation, develop these programs at their institutions. And so sometimes that means they don't have anything and they're like, how do we start, right? What do we do? Sometimes they have things in place and we're looking at scaling up what they already have. The Ascend Center's purpose is to establish best practices in this space, provide that training and technical assistance to campuses, and then evaluate and accredit programs for quality and effectiveness. So, and you can see all the institutions that we've worked with just really primarily over the past 2 years. So a lot of schools in Georgia, and we work very closely with Embark Georgia, who I know you heard from, to connect through the designated points of contact at these institutions across the state. And to that point, there are a lot of things that we're doing very well in Georgia around helping youth who age out of the foster care system who are in higher ed find supports on and off campus, and really what I'd like to spend the rest of my time highlighting is whenever we're working with campuses, especially within Georgia, some of the best practices that we talk to them about. So things that can be implemented generally pretty quickly and generally at like kind of low or no cost. Right? What can we do right now to support students who age out of the foster care system who we know are at your institutions? And so one of those is really making the designated point of contact we have at every system school visible. Right? We want students to know who they are. So sometimes that can mean embedding referral processes within existing systems. So faculty and staff can make referrals to that person. Sometimes that is creating ways where students can self-identify at different points, because most of them don't know coming into school that there is someone there for them. And so one of the things that we've done at Kennesaw and that we've also implemented at other system schools is so at admission, making a way for students to self-identify, right, that they age out of the foster care system. Also at orientation, creating the same, so we're just duplicating in different spaces ways for students to say, kind of raise their hand, right, electronically, and say, I fall into this category. Once we meet with students, we frequently find students who say, I don't necessarily want to be tagged as having aged out of foster care, right? And so at Kennesaw, we have this cohort-based program, Ascend, for students who are okay saying, right, I want to be part of this cohort. But we also work with those students who say, I'm not ready for that. And we just make sure that they are aware of the services that we offer. So should they need them, they know where to find us. They know how to access them. The more kind of preventative, at least outreach that we can do, so that students know there is a safety net if they need it. So it's a lot of outreach, a lot of helping schools develop systems to have a very clear, accessible safety net for students. And also housing. So we're very lucky as part of the Ascend Living Learning community, we have year-round housing. So students don't have to leave at any point. When students also, like I said, that we work with do not have to live in our Ascend Living Learning community. So we have many students who are living in the community or other places on campus. And for those students, we have partnerships and external funding so that we can put them in hotels temporarily, right? So yes, we are they have to move around a bit, but we're creating stability in that they come to us and say, hey, in 2 weeks, I'm not going to have a place to stay. We say, it's okay. We'll help you get there. We'll help you get back, right? We'll create a system so that you don't have to stress about being unhoused. So helping other schools within the network develop similar, even if they don't have year-round housing options, or if they don't have housing options, because not all of our institutions have housing, what partnerships can they develop that can provide those year-round housing options for students to remove that barrier? Similarly, so case management, and there are a lot of options, especially once we get into kind of the higher ed space for case management, that we can utilize interns, right? We can utilize other students who are learning, who are supervised by a professional in the space to provide peer-led case management or peer kind of focused coaching to students. And so those are ways that that reduce cost, but also make services more accessible for students. Another thing that we frequently talk to schools about is strengthening campus partnerships. So financial aid office, housing, dining, counseling, advancement, all of these systems can be siloed sometimes on institutions. And so really creating very strong lines of communication, particularly around serving this population. And finally, I would say data, right? So how are we utilizing existing surveys or existing assessment methods to get information from students about how are these services working? So most institutions have some sort of survey that we have been able to help programs plug into to get this feedback pretty seamlessly from students. So that's really what I wanted to share. We really, like I said, have a solid framework already with our designated points of contact who are in schools. And so it's just a matter of kind of leveling that up, right? Taking what we already have to the next level.
Thank you very much. Obviously, part of KSU's in my district, and they are now at 51,000 students, the third largest in the state. And I've had the opportunity to visit the campus and see the food pantry and a lot of other resources that I'm not usually seeing on college campuses, at least when I went to college, but that's been a minute. But I was curious about how you're making sure that you identify the students that need the services, because we've learned in this committee and many other settings that hands-on, very individually engaged approach is what a lot of these kids, I'm calling them kids again, need. How do you make sure that you're finding the kids?
Yep. So before they even get to KSU, we do, and kind of put in quotations, but recruitment. So Care Services, the Ascend program, we do intentional outreach to the ILS partners that we have, to homeless liaisons, so folks in the schools, the people who are working with juniors and seniors, as well as all of the just community partners, to let them know about the services that we offer and to try to bring them to campus. And so I was able to get grant funding that kind of mirrors bringing to campus students who kind of like we do athletes, right? Like, let's recruit them, bring them to campus to see what we have. We also do that for our students who are Ascend eligible, giving them the opportunity to say, come see what we've got. And then we really prioritize talking to them not only about Kennesaw, but about other institutions that they might be interested in. So come see what we have, but then also let's talk about, is it Chat Tech, right? That's a better place for you to start. And then we can kind of talk about options from there. So we really try before they even get to us to do that outreach. But then we also have very specific points, and those are in partnership with our campus partners, where we are kind of doing that like raise your hand kind of option. So whenever students make their very first advising appointment, they have to answer a series of questions. One of those questions is, were you in the foster care system? And obviously students can say no. It's an option to self-identify. But then if they do, we outreach to them and say, hey, we just want to make sure that you're aware of the services that we offer. Similarly, students are doing the FAFSA for federal financial aid. And so in partnership with our financial aid office, those students who are Ascend eligible, we have an email that our financial aid office sends out to all those students on our behalf saying, hey, based on your FAFSA status, you're also eligible for these support services on campus. And again, what students do with those emails and outreaches is up to them, but just making sure they're aware.
Thank you very much. Appreciate it. Yeah.
Thank you so much. It's a great program. How many students are in Ascend currently?
So our capacity for that program is 60, and we currently have 52 active Ascend scholars and some what we call extended family. So those are folks who aren't necessarily like engaged with the program, but who are still supported by it. And then we also serve students who were in the foster care system, but don't want to be Ascend eligible. And I would say we have about 30 to 40 additional students who meet that criteria currently.
Okay, great. And how many can live in the Living Learning Village?
30.
Great. Okay, thank you.
Yeah. So Living Learning Village is intended to be for first and second year students primarily.
Okay.
And then we help them kind of transition into kind of what comes next for housing, whether that's other on or off campus housing.
Thank you. One of the things that we've identified in this committee is that there's a big drop off from K-12 to post-secondary, and that's multifactorial. But if we could connect the dots between the K-12 system and the technical college system and the university system, that would certainly move the needle. So appreciate you trying to develop best practices and connect with other institutions. Very important.
Thank you.
Okay, so we're going to wrap up, and I want to thank the committee and our staff. We've talked about housing, education, workforce, and complex behavioral issues, and a lot of other things. And although our mission, as I said at the beginning, was transition age youth, prevention certainly plays into that over the long haul. So the presentations will end up on the website for our committee. And as I mentioned at the beginning, we'll be making recommendations based on the testimony that we've heard and voting on those on Friday. That'll probably be very quick. And then anyone who's interested in continuing the conversation, please reach out to us and provide us with any information that you'd like for us to see. The session obviously starts January 12th, I think is the date. And I'm sure there will be some legislation that will be a result of this committee, although many of the recommendations that I think we're going to see have to do with connecting the right people who can work together for solutions. So I really appreciate the interest and the attendance from the public and from the advocacy community and many others in this committee. And with that, we're adjourned. Thank you.